The words hit harder than any slap could have. "Ugly garbage!" My daughter Kayla spat, her voice sharp as a blade. We were standing in my modest kitchen in Spokane, Washington. The hum of the refrigerator was the only other sound, but in that silence, I felt every ounce of contempt in her words. It wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration. She had crossed a line I never thought my own child would. And if you're watching this, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. She thought I wouldn't fight back. She thought that because I was her mother, because I was retired and living on a pension, I'd just roll over and let her use me. That I'd ignore the credit card statements showing thousands spent at Nordstrom, flights to Los Angeles, and luxury dinners at restaurants I'd never set foot in. But that night, something inside me shifted. Years of delivering other people's mail as a postal worker taught me one thing: paper trails don't lie. And Kayla had left more than enough of them. I sat down at the dining table, the stack of bills trembling in my hands. My coffee had gone cold hours earlier, but I barely noticed. The numbers didn't add up. My accounts were bleeding money faster than I could track. She'd used my name, my credit, even my good reputation to build her glamorous life. And when I confronted her, she threw those two cruel words in my face. I looked at her that night, my only child, standing there in designer shoes I unknowingly paid for, and realized she didn't see me as her mother anymore. To her, I was an open wallet. Disposable. That was the moment I decided. If she wanted to treat me like garbage, then I'd let the system dump her into the very financial trash she'd created. I didn't need revenge that broke the law. I didn't need shouting matches or slammed doors. I needed paperwork, patience, and the right people on my side. Because sometimes the cleanest revenge is the kind that leaves a trail even the judge can follow. If that sounds harsh, here's how we got there. After Kayla stormed out that night, slamming the front door so hard the frame rattled, I just stood in my kitchen staring at the empty space she'd left behind. The air conditioner hummed faintly, pushing cool air against my arms, but I still felt flushed with anger. My reflection in the microwave's shiny door looked older, more tired than I remembered, my gray hair frizzing at the edges, my eyes rimmed red from holding back tears. I sat down at the table again, bills spread out like a losing hand of poker. My coffee was stone cold, but I sipped it anyway. The bitter taste grounded me. I thought about all the times I'd let things slide. Every time I told myself, she's young, she'll grow out of it, don't rock the boat. That had been my mantra for years. Truth was, I carried this misbelief deep in my bones. Keeping quiet would keep the peace. I thought if I avoided confrontation, if I smoothed things over, family ties would hold. But looking at those numbers, airline charges, Nordstrom purchases, nights at the Davenport Hotel, it was clear silence hadn't preserved our bond. It had destroyed it. The refrigerator clicked, and I jumped a little. Funny how the smallest sound could jolt me when my nerves were stretched so tight. I closed my eyes and pictured Kayla as a little girl, running up the walkway with pigtails bouncing, clutching a popsicle that melted faster than she could eat it. Back then, I thought giving her everything I could was love. But now she was 35, standing in my kitchen, spitting venom and treating me like a bank she didn't have to repay. My hands shook as I shuffled through the papers again. My pension check wasn't large, just enough to cover the mortgage, groceries, and a modest life. There was no room in there for luxury handbags and weekend getaways to Portland. The air felt heavy, thick with a kind of grief I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that my daughter didn't respect me. That stung worse than any overdraft fee. I rubbed my temples, listening to the faint sound of a neighbor's lawnmower humming down the block. It reminded me that life was still going on outside my walls, ordinary and unbothered. Folks were buying groceries at Safeway, waiting in the drive-thru line at Dutch Brothers for iced lattes, planning barbecues for the weekend. Meanwhile, I sat inside my house drowning in betrayal. And yet, beneath the hurt, a flicker of resolve began to glow. I had spent decades working for the U.S. Postal Service. Rain or shine, I delivered mail, and if there was one thing that job taught me, it was this: The system runs on documentation. Letters, receipts, certified mail, returned signatures, every piece mattered. People could lie, but paperwork told the truth. That thought steadied me. I wasn't powerless. I just hadn't chosen to use the tools in front of me. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to the empty room, "No more." It felt strange, saying it aloud, but also freeing. I was done letting silence speak for me. Still, fear curled in my gut. What would this mean for our relationship? Could a mother take her own daughter to task without tearing the family apart forever? Would Kayla hate me? Maybe. But I already felt hated. Her words proved that. I tapped the bills into a neat stack, then placed them inside a manila folder I kept in my old mailbag. The leather was cracked from years of use, but it felt solid in my hands. Almost symbolic, like my past work was about to help me in this fight. I knew then that this wasn't going to be quick or easy. There would be pushback. There would be moments I wanted to give up. But for once, I wasn't going to keep quiet. But the truth didn't start that night. It started months earlier. Months before Kayla called me ugly garbage. Life had already begun slipping through my fingers in quiet ways I hadn't noticed. Spokane wasn't a sprawling metropolis, but it had pockets of prosperity, and I'd always tried to live comfortably on my modest pension. My house on Whitman Avenue wasn't fancy. 3 bedrooms, a small garden out front, but it was mine. I'd refinanced the mortgage once, decades ago, and never missed a payment. That stability felt like my anchor. Yet even as I prided myself on careful budgeting, Kayla was quietly chipping away at it. At first, it was subtle, her asking me to cover a necessary online cost for a new job, or lending her a few hundred for gas because her car had broken down. I remember thinking, she's my daughter. It's nothing. I never realized how quickly those small amounts would snowball. One Saturday afternoon, I drove down to the Fred Meyer near University District. The lot was nearly full, and the AC in my old Camry was struggling against the August heat. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I made my way through aisles of canned goods and produce. I found a few discount bouquets for my shop, roses and daisies for $12.99 each. I swiped my card, glanced at the receipt, and felt that small satisfaction of managing my little business while staying on budget. Weeks later, I'd discover that same card had been maxed out, hundreds, then thousands, on flights to Los Angeles, Nordstrom handbags, and dinners at the Pink Door, an expensive Seattle spot I'd never been to. My stomach sank when the first statement arrived. I assumed it was a mistake at first. Maybe the bank screwed up, I told myself. But a quick call revealed the truth. It was Kayla. She had used my personal information to make charges in her name. And the audacity didn't stop there. At our church's annual fundraiser that spring, I watched her smile and schmooze with donors, wearing a dress I later learned came from Saks Fifth Avenue on my dime. She spoke of investing in her future, all while draining mine. Yet the whole time, she was the golden child to our neighbors, my friends, and even some family members. Nobody suspected that behind the perfectly curated Instagram photos and charming smile, she was exploiting the woman who had given her everything. I wasn't blind to her human side, though. Kayla had a strange kind of charisma. She volunteered occasionally at the local animal shelter, remembered birthdays, and sometimes called to check in if she felt guilty. Those moments made it easier to rationalize her behavior, to keep giving, to keep hoping she'd grow out of it. I clung to those glimpses of decency like a life raft. Still, I had proof beginning to pile up, even before the ugly garbage moment. An email thread with a travel agency showed her booking flights in my name. A lease contract from a boutique apartment downtown carried my signature, though she never mentioned it. Receipts for dinner parties and luxury coffee orders were tucked into a folder in my kitchen drawer, seemingly innocuous, waiting for the right moment. These documents would later become critical pieces in a legal strategy one hadn't yet fully imagined. Another mini-scene etched into my memory, a visit to the Spokane County Clerk's office that spring. I'd gone to handle some paperwork for a library donation I had made decades earlier. While waiting, I noticed a small flyer about consumer protection complaints, how to file disputes over unauthorized charges, how liens could be placed on misused assets. I tucked it away in my purse at the time, thinking it might come in handy someday, but I never could have guessed just how valuable it would become. Even mundane pressures amplified my anxiety. My small savings had to cover my mortgage, utilities, groceries, and occasional medical bills. I drove past the Safeway every Thursday evening, stopping for a quart of milk and half, wondering how I'd keep afloat if this continued. The math was simple, yet terrifying. A few thousand here, a few thousand there, and suddenly I was teetering on the edge of a financial pitfall I couldn't afford. It wasn't just money. It was time and energy, too. Between caring for the garden, tending to my flower deliveries, and volunteering at the library once a week, I was stretched thin. Kayla's constant requests for loans, rides, or favors began to feel like a silent invasion, sapping both my patience and my health. By late summer, the tension had reached a peak. I remember one Sunday at our local diner, the Satellite Cafe, with its worn vinyl booths and the smell of strong coffee. Kayla was texting under the table while I tried to enjoy a quiet breakfast. She ordered eggs Benedict and avocado toast, and I paid without complaint, masking the unease twisting my stomach. The cashier gave me a sympathetic smile. That smile, small as it was, planted a seed in my mind. Maybe I didn't have to endure this silently. Which brings us to the plan I should have made sooner. By late September, I knew I couldn't ignore Kayla's behavior any longer. The bills, the hidden charges, the lies, they were a pattern, and patterns could be traced. I sat at my dining table with a stack of receipts, emails, and old utility bills spread before me like a map. Each paper, each line of text, was a breadcrumb leading straight to the truth. I called my cousin Frank that evening. He was retired like me, sharp-eyed, and had a knack for numbers and strategy. "Frank," I said, voice low, "I think Kayla's been using my identity. I need to stop her, legally, and for good." Frank didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "First, we document everything. Every receipt, every email, every statement. Then we hit the bank with disputes. After that, small claims court if we need it. You've got this. Paperwork is your weapon." I felt a surge of clarity. For once, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was planning strategically. I began creating a ledger, all unauthorized charges, dates, amounts, and merchants. Flights to LA, $1,234. Dinners at the Pink Door, $420. Nordstrom bags, $980. Each item was logged with the exact date, credit card statement, and, if available, a receipt or confirmation email. Frank helped me label them, creating a neat, color-coded file system. Next, I consulted with a consumer protection officer at the Washington State Department of Financial Institutions. I explained the situation calmly, providing photocopies of my documentation. The officer explained my options: disputes under the Fair Credit Billing Act, filing certified letters demanding repayment, and even placing a lien if necessary on her personal property tied to my credit. I left the office feeling like a general with a full strategy map laid before me. Timing became a crucial factor. The next statement was due in 3 weeks, and Kayla was scheduled to fly to Seattle the day before. I realized I could coordinate the dispute filings so that her charges would be frozen, forcing her to confront the consequences before she even left town. A holiday weekend was coming up, and that meant banks, court clerks, and even local credit union officers would have specific deadlines. Every hour counted. I also reached out to Denise, my friend from church. She had once been a paralegal and had a calm, level-headed approach to conflict. She agreed to guide me through filing certified mail demands and small claims paperwork. She said gently, "This is about boundaries. You're not trying to hurt her, you're trying to protect yourself. That's legal, and it's ethical." I started to see the plan take shape. First, dispute the charges the bank. Second, document everything meticulously. Third, file a small claims complaint if repayment wasn't forthcoming. And finally, use any overlooked evidence, like the old library donation receipt and utility bills, to solidify my case. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about turning Kayla's own recklessness against her, lawfully, decisively, and cleanly. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. I imagined Kayla receiving notices of disputed charges, having to explain herself, and realizing she couldn't manipulate the system or me anymore. It wasn't malicious, it was just boundaries enforced, truth documented, and accountability applied. I set a timer in my mind, 1 month. 1 month to assemble the files, coordinate with the bank, and submit the first round of certified letters. Stakes were high. Any delay, any misstep, could allow Kayla to continue racking up charges or even hide assets. The plan had to be airtight. Then the pushback started. Even at the outset, I encountered resistance. The first bank representative I spoke with was skeptical. "You say your daughter used your account fraudulently?" she asked. "Do you have evidence?" My hands didn't tremble this time. I handed over my ledger. She leafed through it slowly, her expression shifting from doubt to acknowledgement. But I knew every step from here on would require patience and precision. I also realized I would have to limit contact with Kayla during this period. No explanations, no negotiations, just facts, filings, and deadlines. It felt strange, almost cruel, but I understood that boundaries sometimes demand distance. I looked at the calendar on my refrigerator. October 15th, first dispute filing due. October 22nd, small claims paperwork ready. October 30th, potential lien placed. Each date was a milestone on a path I had never thought I'd walk, but now, I was determined. I closed the folder and exhaled. The plan was set. It was legal, ethical, and powerful. Kayla had no idea that the quiet mother she had mocked would become the architect of her own reckoning. Then the real challenge began, executing it without letting my emotions sabotage the process. Once I set the plan in motion, the first waves of resistance appeared almost immediately. The day after I submitted the initial credit disputes, Kayla called. Her tone was sugary, almost innocent. "Mom, why are you putting a hold on my accounts?" "I didn't do anything wrong," she said. I stayed calm, letting her words hang like an echo in the phone line. I didn't argue. I just reminded myself. Boundaries, facts, documentation. The first complication came from the bank. One representative insisted a dispute required notarized proof of identity theft. Another told me that if I didn't submit specific forms within 48 hours, the charges could go through anyway. I spent a full morning scanning, printing, and mailing certified letters with precise wording. The hours crawled, punctuated by the hum of my old AC and the distant rumble of the freeway outside. Each step felt both tedious and critical. Then came a surprise lien notice. While reviewing public records, I discovered that one of Kayla's cars, a leased vehicle registered in my name without my knowledge, was already flagged for late fees. My stomach sank. It wasn't just financial. It was personal. I realized she had been more reckless than I imagined, and my carefully timed plan could be compromised if she moved the asset before the lien could be enforced. To make matters worse, social pressure began to creep in. A few of my neighbors, unaware of the full story, noticed tension when Kayla came over. Whispers at the local bakery and comments at the pharmacy made me second-guess whether my actions were too harsh. I reminded myself that appearances didn't matter, the trail of evidence did. I also encountered a minor reveal that shifted my understanding. While reviewing a stack of old receipts, I found a bank statement from 6 months prior showing an unusual transfer labeled as a gift from Kayla. It was subtle, almost easy to overlook, but it revealed that she had been masking expenses for far longer than I realized. That small clue changed my approach. I now had to consider a broader timeline in my filings and expand my evidence package for the eventual small claim submission. At home, the emotional cost started to build. I woke up at 3 a.m., thinking about deadlines, missing forms, and potential pushback. My hands ached from writing, my eyes from scanning and reviewing documents. The very thought of another call from Kayla made me tense. I had to carefully measure every interaction. One slip of emotion could give her leverage. Even my allies faced limits. Denise, while steady, could only offer guidance. She wasn't legally authorized to intervene. Frank could help with numbers and strategy, but he couldn't act on my behalf. Every action, every certified letter, every filing, every dispute, rested solely on me. The tension escalated further when a surprise email arrived from a local consumer protection office. They requested additional proof for one of the disputes, specifically a contract or signed document linking the charges to Kayla. Panic hit briefly, but then clarity returned. I remembered the library donation receipt from the spring. It wasn't connected to the charges directly, but it proved my pattern of financial responsibility and record-keeping. That document could tip the balance if leveraged correctly. Through all of this, the stakes kept climbing. If I missed a deadline, Kayla could dispute the dispute. If I misfiled a form, the small claims judge could dismiss part of my case. Every hour, every dollar, every document mattered. I realized that executing a lawful, clean revenge required as much patience as precision, as much mental endurance as moral resolve. That's when I realized I'd been looking at the wrong problem. It wasn't just about stopping her charges. It was about reclaiming control over my own life, my finances, and my dignity. The stakes were not simply financial. They were personal. Every obstacle, every pushback, every minor setback was a reminder that I had to be meticulous, steadfast, and unwavering. I closed my ledger and glanced out the kitchen window at the early autumn leaves swirling in the Spokane breeze. This was going to take everything I had. But I was ready. It was a crisp October morning when the shift happened. I was standing in line at the Spokane County Clerk's office, the recycled air smelling faintly of paper and coffee, clutching my manila folder tight. My hands felt steady for once, despite the knots in my stomach. The thought that had been simmering for weeks crystallized. This wasn't just about recouping money. It was about standing up, publicly, and drawing a boundary Kayla couldn't ignore. I remember the moment vividly. A mother with a stroller ahead of me smiled warmly, her toddler giggling as the boy waved at a poster of a courthouse on the wall. The normalcy of their lives, the safety they felt in routine, made me realize how much I had let Kayla's chaos invade mine. I wasn't just disputing charges. I was reclaiming the peace and security she had disrupted. By the time I reached the front counter, I had made a decision. No more waiting for apologies. No more hoping for change. I was reframing the goal. My aim wasn't vengeance alone. It was establishing firm, legal, and ethical boundaries that would protect me forever. So, how would you like to proceed? The clerk asked, her tone professional but gentle. I explained that I was filing small claims paperwork for unauthorized charges and that I had documentation to prove the pattern of misuse. As I laid out the receipts, emails, and utility statements, I noticed the clerk's eyebrows lift slightly. She even murmured, "Well, that's thorough." That small acknowledgement was enough to give me confidence that the system could work for me. Public stance became critical. When I returned home, I told Denise, I'm going to stop asking for permission. I'm going to follow the rules, every single one. She nodded, her eyes encouraging. I drafted an email to the bank, outlining each charge in detail, and sent copies via certified mail. The sense of authority in my tone surprised even me. I wasn't pleading, I was asserting facts. Then came the first real test, a phone call from Kayla. She was calm, almost manipulative in her composure. "Mom, I don't know why you're doing this. Can't we just talk?" I paused, remembering the countless times I had caved in the past. But this time, I spoke firmly, clearly. "Kayla, the conversation isn't up for negotiation. I'm following legal procedures to protect my finances. That's all." I could hear her frustration simmering on the other end. No tantrums, no tears, just the sharp intake of breath that comes from someone realizing they can't control you anymore. For the first time, I felt empowered, not guilty. I had found my leverage, not through anger, but through methodical action. The shift also included a strategic upgrade to my plan. Previously, I had been reacting, filing disputes, sending letters, documenting evidence. Now, I added another layer, monitoring credit reports weekly, preparing a potential lien if the bank needed extra backup, and scheduling follow-up meetings with the consumer protection officer. Every step was designed to stay fully within the law while tightening the net around Kayla's financial misbehavior. I even made a small declaration aloud to myself, standing in the kitchen as the morning sun slanted through the blinds. This is no longer about fear or forgiveness. This is about fairness, rules, and dignity. The words felt solid, like setting stakes in concrete. I wasn't angry. I was determined. So I stopped asking for permission and started following the rules, every single one. I built my timeline. First dispute letter sent, second check-in with the bank, small claims filing ready by the end of the month. Every action now had intent, every document had weight, and every interaction with Kayla became a controlled exchange. By midday, I felt a calm clarity I hadn't known in months. The energy that once went into anxiety, fear, and anger was now channeled into strategy. I realized I was no longer a passive participant in this story. I had become an active agent, the architect of a lawful, ethical, and fully documented plan that could protect my finances and, more importantly, my dignity. And that clarity, more than any court filing or letter, felt like victory. The first step of execution began with precision. I printed all the documents, the ledger of charges, receipts, email threads, and copies of utility bills. Each page was double-checked, dated, and labeled in a color-coded system Frank had helped me design. It looked like a small fortress of evidence, each file a brick holding up my case. I started with the bank disputes. The first certified letter went out on a Monday morning, addressed to the fraud department with a clear subject line, unauthorized charges, account #XXXXXX. I included copies of receipts and emails, along with a concise statement of events. I kept a second copy in my ledger, noting the USPS tracking number. I repeated the process for each charge, staggering the mailings to ensure deadlines aligned with upcoming statements. At the same time, I filed the paperwork for potential small claims court action. I typed up a concise complaint, listing every charge, the dates, amounts, and evidence references. I attached copies of the bank statements and receipts, and I made sure the filing fee was ready, a modest $60, but it felt like an investment in justice. I walked to the Spokane County Clerk's office with the folder in my arms, noting the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint scent of paper and coffee. Each step felt deliberate, controlled. Next, I scheduled follow-up calls with the consumer protection officer. I knew that persistence mattered. During one call, I confirmed that all documentation met requirements under the Fair Credit Billing Act, and that if Kayla refused repayment, a small claims filing could proceed without delay. I also inquired about placing a lien on her leased vehicle if necessary, and the officer walked me through the legal language for a certified notice. Every conversation reinforced that I was acting within the law. At home, I kept everything organized in my manila folder and a separate accordion file labeled by charge type and date. This attention to detail was exhausting, but it gave me a tangible sense of control. I even set reminders on my phone. Letters mailed, dispute deadlines, bank follow-ups. Each ding from the calendar felt like another gear turning in my well-oiled plan. One evening, I met with Denise to review progress. We went over the documentation, confirming the sequence of certified mail, dispute letters, and evidence copies. She smiled at my meticulousness. "Dot," she said, "you're not just defending yourself, you're teaching a lesson in accountability." That simple phrase reminded me that my actions weren't vengeful, they were lawful and precise. I also had to anticipate pushback from Kayla. She texted me midweek, trying to guilt me with subtle manipulations. "I thought you trusted me, Mom. Why are you doing this?" I didn't respond. Instead, I noted the message in the ledger, printing a copy for potential court evidence. I had learned that in disputes like this, emotional reactions could undermine facts. By the third week, the first bank responses arrived. Each one acknowledged receipt of my disputes and temporarily froze the charges. It was a small victory, but significant. It meant the system was working. I tracked every response meticulously, updating my timeline and double-checking against my ledger. The crescendo of execution came with filing the small claims complaint. I submitted the documents, paid the filing fee, and received a case number with the court date stamped, November 15th. I also sent copies to Kayla via certified mail. The weight of action settled over me like a quiet pride. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't threatened. I had relied on careful planning, documented facts, and lawful channels. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. For a brief, shining moment, it felt like everything had gone according to plan. The bank had frozen all disputed charges, the certified letters had been delivered and signed, and my small claims filing was officially acknowledged. Kayla hadn't responded with arguments or threats, just silence. I even felt a small surge of satisfaction watching her social media posts continue as if nothing was happening, completely unaware that the tide had shifted. I allowed myself a quiet celebration one Friday evening. Sitting on my porch, sipping a chamomile tea, I felt the Spokane breeze on my cheeks and thought, finally, control. I imagined the court date approaching, Kayla forced to explain her reckless behavior under the glare of official scrutiny. It was almost too perfect. Almost. The backfire arrived unexpectedly the following Monday. A call from the bank made my stomach drop. Said the representative, her voice careful. We've received a notice that your daughter may be disputing the disputes. She filed a counterclaim through the Identity Verification Office. We need additional documents to validate your claims. My heart skipped. I hadn't anticipated this. Kayla had apparently learned about a loophole, a procedural step I had overlooked. Suddenly, the neat tower of paperwork I had built seemed precarious. If the additional documentation wasn't accepted, some charges could be reinstated, and the small claims process might be delayed. At the same time, social backlash quietly crept in. My neighbor, Mrs. Lane from across Whitman Avenue, mentioned she had seen my posts on community forums discussing family disputes over finances. Even without naming names, the rumor mill had started spinning. I began to feel that faint twinge of doubt creeping in. Was I overstepping? Was my lawful plan becoming a public spectacle? Denise reassured me. Don't let appearances scare you. Facts and documentation are on your side. Ignore the gossip. But it was hard not to feel exposed. I had always valued discretion, and now the very act of enforcing boundaries had drawn attention. Then came another twist from Frank. He had discovered a prior utility transfer from Kayla that indicated she had been co-signing or using my name on accounts far earlier than I realized. This meant my original dispute timeline was incomplete. I felt a pang of frustration. Had I underestimated her cunning? Or had I simply been too trusting? Emotionally, I hit a low point that evening. I sat in my living room, the soft light of the table lamp casting shadows over my kitchen ledger, wondering if all my effort would unravel. Every plan, every step, every hour of meticulous preparation now felt like it could collapse with a single clerical error. And yet, even in that moment, a tiny spark of clarity emerged. I realized the backfire wasn't a failure. It was a signal. Kayla had underestimated my resolve. The procedural hurdles were challenges to overcome, not threats to derail me. I had built a legal, ethical framework strong enough to absorb these shocks. All I needed was one missing piece of documentation to re-anchor the plan. Until one line in an old message changed everything. That line came from an email buried in my old inbox, dated 6 months earlier. I almost missed it, lost among newsletters and reminders. But there it was. Kayla had messaged her college advisor about unexpected family finances and referenced a $3,200 transfer labeled as emergency tuition support. At first glance, it seemed like just another expense. but the sender and recipient details told a different story. That money had gone directly into a joint account that was technically under my name, not High's. My pulse quickened. This single message reframed everything. Kayla hadn't been careless in a vacuum. She had been covering tracks, manipulating the timing of transfers to make her spending appear justified. It wasn't just entitlement, it was strategic misdirection. That explained the earlier suspicious gift deposits I had noticed in my ledger. Every transaction suddenly aligned, forming a clear trail of intentional behavior. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of the truth settle. Kayla wasn't just reckless. She was aware of what she was doing, and she had counted on my passivity to shield her. The realization was bitter, but also clarifying. I understood now why the bank had flagged counter-dispute filings. She was trying to preempt me, hoping procedural noise would protect her from accountability. I pulled the library donation receipt from months prior, an innocuous piece of paper I had kept almost out of habit. It suddenly became pivotal. Alongside my utility bills, receipts, and emails, it illustrated a pattern. I had been meticulous in documenting finances, while Kayla had been exploiting my oversight. The Chekhov's gun of my meticulous record-keeping had been planted for this exact moment. I also realized that Denise's insistence on thoroughness had been essential. Without her guidance on documenting every interaction and filing certified mail, I would have had gaps Kayla could exploit. And Frank's insistence on color-coded timelines and double-checked evidence had transformed what could have been chaos into an unassailable argument. Every ally had contributed to this major reveal, but the key moment was this email, a single digital breadcrumb revealing intention. Now, with full clarity, I knew exactly where to stand. I wasn't fighting a vague pattern of irresponsibility anymore. I was confronting deliberate, calculated misuse of my finances. The stakes were higher, yes, but so was my confidence. I knew my evidence was airtight, and the path to lawful resolution was clear. I organized my files with renewed precision. Every transaction had a note, date, merchant, amount, supporting email or receipt, and a reference to the emergency tuition email where applicable. I created a visual timeline, mapping every charge and payment against her attempts to obfuscate. It looked like a map of her misdirection, but in my hands, it became a blueprint for accountability. The major reveal also reshaped my emotional perspective. I no longer saw Kayla as just a wayward daughter. I saw her as someone who needed to face the consequences of her actions, legally and ethically. The misbelief I had carried, that keeping peace at all costs was safer, shattered. I realized that fairness and boundaries were more important than avoiding conflict, and that the law could be an instrument of measured, just response. Finally, I scheduled a follow-up meeting with the Consumer Protection Officer. With the email in hand, my ledger, and all supporting documents, I felt unstoppable. The officer reviewed everything, nodded, and said, "This will make your dispute and potential small claims filing very strong. You've got your bases covered." At last, I could see the final plan taking shape in real terms. The bank disputes, the small claims complaint, and the potential lien on her leased property were all aligned. Kayla's efforts to hide behind procedural loopholes would crumble under the weight of documented evidence. Now I was ready for the final stage. My approach would be lawful, ethical, and decisive, a clean, unavoidable consequence for her reckless behavior. I felt a sense of calm resolve. The stage was set. I knew exactly where to stand. The day I sent the final certified letters was the day I felt the first real rush of adrenaline. I had spent weeks building a fortress of evidence, ledgers, receipts, emails, utility statements, and that crucial emergency tuition email. Every document was numbered, color-coded, and cross-referenced. The plan wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate, lawful, and airtight. I started with the bank. Each dispute was submitted with supporting documentation, clearly labeling the unauthorized charges and citing the Fair Credit Billing Act. I included copies of the certified letters I had already sent to Kayla, making sure the timeline was indisputable. Within 2 business days, The bank confirmed that all disputed transactions were frozen. Kayla would have to explain herself if she wanted to access those funds, and she couldn't do it without proof. Next came the small claims filing. The courthouse was humming with routine traffic, the faint smell of coffee and paper mixing with the morning chill from the slightly open windows. I filed the paperwork personally, paying the $60 filing fee, and received the case number with the court date stamped, November 15th. I mailed copies to Kayla via certified mail, ensuring every step was traceable and undeniable. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter, who had called me ugly garbage, was now facing an official document requiring her to answer for her misuse of my accounts. I didn't stop there. I contacted the consumer protection officer I had been working with, providing the full evidence packet. We discussed the potential lien on her leased vehicle, a strategic backup if she attempted to avoid repayment. The officer explained the process clearly. I could issue a formal notice, file a lien, and the vehicle company would be legally obliged to cooperate. The thought of Kayla realizing she couldn't just slide through life without accountability gave me a quiet, almost meditative satisfaction. In parallel, I organized all interactions with allies. Denise reviewed every document for clarity and legal sufficiency. Frank verified all numbers and dates, ensuring my timeline left no gaps. Together, we reviewed every certified mail receipt, double-checking that the timeline was airtight. I felt a sense of precision that I hadn't experienced in years. Every meticulous step was a shield against chaos, a lawful mechanism that turned my daughter's recklessness into tangible consequences. The first phone call from Kayla after all of this was a mixture of disbelief and panic. "Mom, what is happening? Why are you doing this?" Her voice wavered, not with anger but with the shock of someone realizing that her usual manipulations wouldn't work. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I calmly reminded her, "Kayla, these are the consequences of your actions. I followed the law. If you want resolution, you need to cooperate fully." Watching her struggle was cathartic, not because I enjoyed it, but because for the first time, she was facing accountability. She could no longer hide behind excuses, tears, or charm. I had established boundaries, and the law enforced them. The next few weeks were a rhythm of preparation and observation. I monitored credit reports weekly, ensuring that no new unauthorized charges slipped through. Each bank response, each certified letter acknowledgement, each update from the consumer protection officer reinforced that my plan was working. The chaos that had once felt like a storm swirling around me had been tamed into a structured process that I could control. When the small claims court date arrived, I was ready. Kayla showed up, looking tense but attempting to mask it with a casual smile. I presented my evidence calmly and methodically. Each receipt, each email, each ledger entry was laid out with precision. The judge listened carefully, occasionally flipping through the documents. Kayla had no counter-evidence. Every attempt she had made to obscure her actions was documented and accounted for. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled decisively in my favor. All disputed charges were officially reversed, and Kayla was ordered to reimburse any remaining amounts, along with court fees. I felt a wave of relief and calm pride wash over me. This wasn't revenge in the sense of malice. It was justice through methodical, lawful action. I followed up with the bank and placed the formal notice for the potential lien on her leased vehicle, which further cemented the seriousness of the consequences. Kayla's attempts to deflect, manipulate, or ignore responsibility were effectively neutralized. Then came the ripple effect. Calls from family members, once skeptical or distant, came in with surprise and, in some cases, tentative praise. They had seen the process unfold and understood the strength it took to act decisively, ethically, and legally. I had reclaimed not just my finances but my reputation and peace of mind. Emotionally, I moved from adrenaline to calm resolve. I realized that the real victory wasn't the reimbursement or the frozen charges. It was proving to myself that I could enforce boundaries firmly and lawfully, without compromise or personal risk. Every meticulous record, every legal filing, every careful step was a manifestation of that inner strength. I sat in my kitchen that evening, the ledger neatly filed away, the autumn light slanting across the table. I could finally breathe. The storm was over. Kayla had learned her lesson in accountability, and I had reclaimed control over my life, finances, and dignity. And just as I allowed myself a moment of peace, the phone rang. The days after the court ruling were quieter than I expected, almost surreal. Kayla's initial defiance faded into begrudging compliance. Bank transfers arrived promptly, reversing the unauthorized charges, along with court-ordered reimbursements. The small, certified envelopes I had once worried over now felt like trophies of patience, diligence, and lawful action. Family dynamics shifted subtly but noticeably. My brother called to apologize for doubting my judgment, and even Aunt Marge, who had once whispered about family drama, expressed admiration for the way I handled things. Social media quieted too. Rumors of my aggressive dispute faded when everyone realized it was all legal, documented, and reasonable. For the first time in months, I didn't have to constantly monitor my accounts or anticipate Kayla's next move. Kayla's attitude changed too, though not dramatically. She avoided excuses, offered short acknowledgments of debt repayment, and curiously, stopped calling me names. I didn't gloat or punish further. I let the legal system enforce accountability. Watching her navigate the aftermath quietly was almost more satisfying than any confrontation. She had experienced the consequences without me having to step outside the law or compromise my ethics. I also noticed a newfound sense of personal authority in myself. I no longer hesitated to enforce boundaries with friends, colleagues, or even strangers who tried to take advantage of my accommodating nature. The meticulous planning and lawful execution had taught me that being assertive and ethical could coexist beautifully. Even my day-to-day routines carried a new confidence. Walking through the Safeway on Division Street, paying bills online, or managing appointments with the bank, all the small tasks felt like steps in reclaiming my life. Every receipt I filed, every email I archived, became a reminder that methodical, lawful actions create tangible outcomes. And yet, a small, reflective pause reminded me the journey wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about fairness, boundaries, and accountability. I had learned to enforce those limits calmly, firmly, and legally. Kayla had faced consequences, but so had I, in the form of persistence, patience, and planning. That balance made the resolution feel earned, not Pyrrhic. And just when I thought it was settled, a subtle shift occurred, one that would soon test the durability of everything I had built. Sitting in the quiet of my living room, I reflected on everything that had happened, the rage, the planning, the meticulous documentation, and finally, the lawful execution. My misbelief had been clear all along, that keeping the peace at all costs was safer than setting firm boundaries. Kayla's behavior had challenged that notion head-on. And through this entire process, I discovered the truth. Enforcing boundaries, with patience and lawfulness, is not just safe, it's empowering. Boundaries, I realized, are not about punishment. They are about clarity. By defining limits with clear consequences, I had created a system in which accountability was inevitable. I hadn't yelled, shamed, or humiliated Kayla. I had relied on procedures, documentation, and legal frameworks to ensure fairness. That approach preserved my integrity while also teaching a necessary lesson. Another key takeaway was the power of preparation. My detailed ledger, color-coded files, and careful timeline weren't obsessive. They were essential. Each receipt, email, and bank statement became a tool of empowerment. Without that preparation, I could not have achieved the calm, decisive resolution I had reached. Preparation transforms frustration into actionable steps and anxiety into control. Finally, I learned that change is possible, even in someone who initially seems resistant. Kayla's small, hesitant steps toward accountability after the court ruling demonstrated that consequences, when administered fairly and consistently, can foster growth. I didn't have to force change with anger or emotional manipulation. lawful boundaries and structure were enough to catalyze it. In the end, the story was as much about me as it was about Kayla. I had learned to trust myself, trust the systems in place, and trust that ethical, deliberate action could yield tangible results. Fairness, integrity, and planning became my tools, not just for this situation, but for life beyond it. Here's the picture I want you to keep. A woman, weary but steady, who faced disrespect and manipulation, and through preparation, patience, and lawful action, reclaimed her life, enforced boundaries, and discovered the strength within herself. That quiet victory, the sense of control, ethical power, and clarity, is more valuable than any dramatic confrontation ever could be. The Spokane morning was crisp, with sunlight streaming through the blinds and dust motes dancing lazily in the golden rays. I stood in the kitchen, the same space where I had first realized the depth of Kayla's disregard, but now everything felt different. The counters were tidy, the ledger neatly filed, and the soft hum of the AC provided a comforting rhythm. This kitchen, once a battlefield of frustration and betrayal, had become a space of calm authority and quiet triumph. I poured myself a cup of coffee, savoring the warmth. The aroma was ordinary, mundane even, but it carried a sense of renewal. I glanced at the filing cabinet where every receipt, email, and document from the ordeal rested, organized and accessible. It wasn't just paper, it was proof of planning, patience, and lawful action. Each page was a reminder that boundaries enforced with integrity could reshape circumstances without malice. Looking out the window, I saw the autumn leaves drifting across the street. Life continued around me, neighbors walking dogs, a school bus rolling down Whitman Avenue, the distant roar of traffic on the freeway, but I felt anchored, centered, and unshakable. The chaos of the past months had been replaced by structure and peace. Kayla, too, was navigating her responsibilities, a subtle shift that confirmed the quiet impact of consequence. As I sipped my coffee, I realized the story wasn't about victory in the dramatic sense. It was about reclaiming control, reinforcing ethics, and discovering strength in lawful action. The ledger, the letters, the certified mail, they were symbols of empowerment. The calm satisfaction of knowing I had acted decisively, fairly, and legally was more powerful than any shout or confrontation could ever be. Here's the enduring image. The same kitchen, same countertops, same morning light, but transformed. The space reflects not the chaos of anger or frustration, but the serenity of preparation, the clarity of boundaries, and the quiet pride of acting ethically and effectively. I had faced manipulation, disrespect, and financial deceit, and emerged not with bitterness, but with mastery over my life and choices. If this hit home, subscribe and tell me your state in the comments. Your story might be next.